In this episode, we're going to focus on something that sounds simple but causes an enormous amount of real-world failure when it is missing: clear ownership and clear approvals for AI risk decisions. When learners are new, it is easy to assume that if a system exists, someone must be responsible for it. But in many organizations, the responsibility is scattered across teams that each own a piece of the pipeline. That scattering creates a dangerous situation where everyone can touch the system, yet no one feels accountable when something goes wrong or when risk decisions need to be revisited. The goal is not to create bureaucracy for its own sake, but to make sure that in the moments that matter, there is no confusion about who decides, who acts, and who accepts residual risk. If you can master this topic, you will understand how risk management becomes real, because risk decisions are only meaningful when they have an owner and an approval path that people actually follow. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyber.author.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. Ownership is the assignment of responsibility for a thing, and in AI risk management, that thing is often not a single system, but a set of connected components and decisions. A risk owner is the person or role that is accountable for tracking a specific risk, ensuring controls are in place, and making sure the risk is reassessed when conditions change. Ownership is different from doing all the work personally, because owners can delegate tasks, but they cannot delegate accountability. In practice, ownership ensures that when a new data source is connected or a new model version is deployed, someone is responsible for asking whether the change shifts the risk. Beginners sometimes confuse ownership with blame, but mature organizations treat ownership as clarity, because clarity prevents panic and finger-pointing later. When ownership is explicit, teams move faster during incidents because they do not waste time searching for the person who can answer key questions. Approvals are the decision checkpoints that determine whether a system can move forward, change, or continue operating under certain conditions. An approval is not just a signature. It is a structured moment when someone with authority reviews information and accepts responsibility for a decision. For AI risk, approvals often involve decisions like whether a use case is allowed, what data can be used, whether a vendor is acceptable, and what controls must be implemented before launch. Approvals also include accepting residual risk, meaning the risk that remains after controls are in place, and after the first mention we will refer to this as residual risk. Residual risk is unavoidable, but it must be owned, because otherwise the organization drifts into risk it would not consciously choose. When approvals are clear, there is less temptation to bypass safety steps, because people know exactly what must happen to proceed. A common beginner misunderstanding is thinking that ownership and approvals are only needed for high-severity or high-visibility systems. In reality, small systems often become large dependencies over time, and the absence of ownership becomes more damaging as usage grows. An internal AI assistant might begin as a helpful tool for a small group, then expand to many teams, then become embedded in workflows that affect customers, and suddenly its risk profile has changed dramatically. Without ownership, no one notices the shift until something breaks or a policy violation becomes public. Without approvals, changes are made informally, and informal change is where access expands, data boundaries blur, and safety controls become inconsistent. Domain 2 expects you to understand that risk is dynamic, and dynamic risk requires dynamic accountability. Clear ownership and approvals are how you keep the system aligned with the organization's risk appetite as it evolves. To assign owners correctly, you need to recognize that AI systems have multiple kinds of ownership, and confusing them is a common source of accountability gaps. There is business ownership, meaning who benefits from the system and is responsible for the business outcome it supports. There is technical ownership, meaning who operates and maintains the system components, such as the application layer, model integration, and data pipelines. There is data ownership, meaning who is responsible for the data sources the system uses and the rules governing that data. There is security ownership, meaning who defines security requirements, monitors risk signals, and coordinates incident response. In many organizations, these owners are not the same person, and that is fine as long as responsibilities are explicit. The problem occurs when everyone assumes someone else owns the risk, because then risk becomes an orphan and decisions are delayed. A beginner should learn to ask a simple question. If this risk becomes real tomorrow, who is expected to answer for it, and who can authorize action? Approvals should match the level of risk, and the reason this matters is that over-approving creates bottlenecks, while under-approving creates uncontrolled exposure. Low-risk use cases may require a lightweight approval path that confirms basic data handling rules, basic access controls, and basic monitoring expectations. Higher-risk use cases should require approvals from roles that understand business impact, legal exposure, and operational consequences, such as a business executive, a privacy lead, or a risk committee, depending on how the organization is structured. Approval paths should also be clear about what information must be presented, because a decision cannot be sound if it is based on vague descriptions. For AI, that information often includes use case definition, user population, data sources, model and vendor details, key controls, monitoring plan, and incident readiness. Beginners should understand that approvals are not there to slow progress. They are there to ensure the right people accept the right trade-offs consciously. When approvals are right-sized, they actually speed innovation because teams do not have to argue about who needs to sign off each time. A strong approval system also includes approvals for change, not just approvals for launch, because many incidents happen when systems drift beyond their original boundaries. Changes that commonly require approval include connecting new data sources, enabling new integrations that can take actions, expanding the user population, changing model versions, and altering policy enforcement settings. In a mature approach, the approval required for a change is proportional to how much the change increases risk. If a change increases access to sensitive data, it should trigger a stronger approval path than a change that only improves performance. Monitoring signals can also trigger approval requirements, such as when policy violations rise or misuse attempts become more frequent, because those signals indicate the risk environment has changed. Beginners should notice that this creates a feedback loop, where monitoring informs governance and governance informs what changes are allowed. That loop is what keeps risk management alive instead of frozen at launch. Clarity about approvals also depends on documenting decision authority, because people need to know who can say yes, who can say no, and who can accept exceptions. Exceptions are unavoidable in real operations, such as when a team needs urgent access or when a control blocks legitimate work, but exceptions are risky if they become permanent loopholes. A good system defines who can grant an exception, how long it lasts, and what compensating controls are required while it exists. Compensating controls are alternative safeguards used when the preferred control is not possible, and after the first mention we will refer to these as compensating controls. For example, if a feature must remain enabled temporarily, compensating controls might include limiting it to a small user group and increasing monitoring. Documenting authority prevents the situation where an exception is approved informally by someone without the right perspective. Beginners should see that clarity around exceptions is not a sign of weakness. It is a sign of maturity because it anticipates real-world pressure and manages it safely. Assigning owners also requires making ownership practical, meaning owners must have the ability to fulfill their responsibilities. It is unfair and ineffective to label someone as an owner if they cannot access the necessary information, cannot influence controls, or cannot coordinate with the teams that operate the system. Practical ownership includes access to monitoring data, the ability to request or approve changes, and a defined path to escalate issues when needed. It also includes an understanding of what is expected of the owner, such as reviewing monitoring metrics regularly, participating in reassessments, and signing off on major changes. If ownership is vague, like saying the business owns it, no one knows who in the business is responsible, and action stalls. If ownership is too technical, like saying engineering owns everything, business impact may be ignored and risk acceptance may happen without appropriate authority. Beginners should learn that effective ownership is a balance between decision authority and operational reality, and it must be designed, not assumed. Accountability becomes especially important during incidents, because incidents are when unclear ownership turns into lost time. When an AI incident occurs, responders need to know who can approve containment actions, who can provide system context, and who can make the call to pause or restrict functionality. If these roles are unclear, teams either hesitate, allowing harm to spread, or they act without authority, creating conflict and confusion. Clear ownership also ensures that evidence collection, documentation, and reporting obligations are handled by the right stakeholders, such as involving privacy and legal when personal data might be involved. This does not mean every incident needs executive involvement, but it does mean that escalation triggers and approval authority are defined in advance. For beginners, the key idea is that accountability is an incident control because it reduces response time and reduces contradictory actions. When accountability is clear, the organization responds as a coordinated system rather than as competing individuals. Another important part of this topic is avoiding the trap of shared responsibility without clear boundaries, because shared responsibility often becomes diluted responsibility. It is true that AI risk is shared across teams, but sharing does not mean ambiguity. It means collaboration with explicit roles. A helpful mindset is to separate accountability from responsibility, where one party is accountable for the outcome and multiple parties are responsible for tasks that support that outcome. The accountable owner ensures tasks are assigned, deadlines exist, and decisions are made, while responsible teams execute monitoring, controls, data governance, and operational maintenance. Even without formal diagrams or lists, you can describe this clearly in plain language by naming who owns the decision and who supports it. Beginners should recognize that collaboration is easier when boundaries are clear because people do not step on each other or wait for someone else to move. Clear roles also improve trust because teams feel the process is fair and predictable, not political. Ownership and approvals must also connect to enterprise risk reporting because leadership needs visibility into which AI risks are being managed and whether risk acceptance aligns with appetite. When a risk is high and remains high, enterprise reporting should show who owns it, what controls exist, and what plan exists to reduce it. When residual risk is accepted, the reporting should reflect who accepted it and why, because that creates institutional memory and prevents surprises later. This visibility is what supports resource allocation, because leaders can fund the controls and staffing needed to meet the risk goals they approve. Without this connection, AI risk management becomes a side process that lacks power, and teams may be forced to operate with inadequate safeguards. Beginners should see that approvals are also budgeting signals, because approving a high-risk use case without funding the controls is a hidden decision to accept more risk than intended. Connecting ownership and approvals to enterprise reporting keeps decisions aligned with resources. It is also important to recognize the human psychology that makes people avoid clear ownership, because understanding the pressure helps you design better systems. People avoid ownership because they fear being blamed, they fear slowing progress, or they fear being responsible for something they cannot fully control. Approvals can also be avoided because they feel like permission-seeking, and teams may believe they can move faster by bypassing them. A mature approach addresses these fears by making ownership realistic, making approval paths fast for low-risk work, and making expectations transparent and fair. It also creates a culture where identifying risk early is rewarded rather than punished, because that culture encourages honesty and reduces shadow projects. For beginners, this is a crucial mindset. Accountability is not a trap. It is a tool that makes work safer and smoother. When the organization treats ownership as stewardship rather than blame, people participate more willingly. As we close, assigning AI risk owners and approvals is about ensuring that every significant risk decision has a name attached to it and a path for decisions that does not change depending on who is asking. Ownership creates continuity over time so risks are tracked, reassessed, and managed as systems evolve, while approvals create disciplined decision points where residual risk is consciously accepted or reduced. Clear ownership must reflect the reality of AI pipelines, including business outcomes, technical operations, and data governance, and it must be practical so owners can act. Clear approvals must be right-sized so low-risk work can move quickly and high-risk work receives the attention and authority it deserves. Together, ownership and approvals prevent the most common failure pattern in AI security, which is not a lack of tools but a lack of clarity about who decides and who is accountable. When accountability is never unclear, the organization responds faster, learns faster, and adopts AI with more confidence, which is exactly how risk management enables opportunity.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.